The embers glowed, a desperate pulse against the encroaching dark. Around them, the huddled village slept fitfully, its dreams haunted by the fever gripping the small, pale form cradled in Elara's arms. The air, thick with the scent of damp straw and wood smoke, offered little comfort. This was no fairy tale realm of cackling hags on broomsticks, no whimsical conjurer of colourful spells. This was the gnawing, suffocating fear of a tangible, insidious force, a force that could blight the nascent barley in the fields, turning emerald shoots to blackened dust, a force that could strike down a prize bull with a wasting sickness, leaving only bone and despair, a force that could, with chilling swiftness, steal the very breath from a child's fragile lungs. This primal dread, woven into the fabric of medieval existence, was the true genesis of the witch, not a creature of elaborate incantations or pacts with infernal powers, at least not in the initial pervasive consciousness of the common folk. Rather, the witch was born of suspicion, of tangible misfortune that defied rational explanation. When the milk curdled inexplicably, when a toothache lingered with agonizing persistence, when a child's skin turned unnaturally pale and cold, the whispers began. They were not accusations shouted from rooftops, but hushed, fearful murmurs exchanged in the shadows behind tightly shuttered windows. Imagine the scene: a harsh winter, stores running low, the relentless wind howling like a hungry wolf. Then, a sudden frost, unseasonable and brutal, decimates the last of the stored root vegetables. The collective anxiety already taught snaps. Who had the ill-favored gaze? Whose words had seemed to carry an unnatural chill when the weather turned? The focus shifted from the impersonal cruelty of nature to a specific human source of malevolence. It was easier, perhaps, to blame a neighbor, a solitary woman, a crone ostracized by her very solitude, than to grapple with the sheer, overwhelming indifference of the universe. The concept of maleficium, of harmful magic, became the tangible manifestation of this fear. It was the unseen hand that twisted the farmer's plough, that soured the baker's bread, that conjured nightmares in the sleep of the innocent. This was not about grand pronouncements or flamboyant displays of power. It was about the subtle, insidious corruption of everyday life, a curse whispered over a threshold, a handful of dirt thrown into a well, a carefully knotted string left to fray in the wind. These were the instruments of the witch, the subtle but devastating tools that brought ruin and despair. The fear was palpable, a constant hum beneath the surface of daily life. It dictated social interactions, fostering suspicion where community should have thrived. A stranger's arrival, a peculiar ailment, a run of bad luck, all could be attributed to the malevolent intent of an unseen enemy. This ingrained suspicion, amplified by the precariousness of existence, created fertile ground for the demonization of those who did not conform, those who lived on the fringes, those whose lives were marked by hardship or unconventional practices. The witch became the embodiment of all that was feared and incomprehensible in their world, a convenient scapegoat for the myriad hardships they endured. This was not a myth born of fantasy. It was a terror born of lived experience, of hunger, of loss, of the chilling realization that sometimes the greatest darkness resides not in the supernatural, but in the human heart. Before the shadowed figures of Salem, before the pyres of medieval Europe, the concept of the witch was a far more fluid and in many ways a more venerated entity. To truly understand the archetype that would evolve into the terrifying hag of folklore, we must journey back into the mists of pre-Christian and ancient societies, to the very dawn of human spirituality. These were worlds where the veil between the seen and the unseen was thin, where the natural world was alive with spirit, and where certain individuals held a profound connection to its hidden energies. Across the vast tapestry of early human cultures, from the nomadic tribes of Siberia to the settled communities of ancient Mesopotamia, there existed individuals who were set apart. They were the wise women, the healers, the shamans, the men and women who communed with the spirits of the land, the ancestors, and the very forces that governed life and death. These were not figures of inherent evil, but rather conduits, intermediaries between the mundane and the sacred. They possessed knowledge of herbs, of the celestial cycles, of the subtle energies that flowed through living things. Their practices were integral to the survival and well-being of their communities, offering solace, healing, and guidance in a world often fraught with peril. These early spiritual practitioners were revered for their wisdom and their ability to navigate the liminal spaces of existence. They understood the interconnectedness of all things, drawing power not from a singular, malevolent source, but from the very fabric of the cosmos. Their ceremonies, their rituals, were acts of balance, of seeking harmony with the natural world and appeasing the unseen forces that shape their destinies. In these ancient traditions, the ability to influence events through means beyond the ordinary was not inherently sinister. It was a gift, a skill honed through deep understanding and connection. However, even in these early stages, the seeds of apprehension were sown. The very power that made these individuals respected also made them potentially feared. The other, the one who possessed knowledge or abilities not readily understood by the majority, could easily become a focus of suspicion. When crops failed, when illness struck, or when misfortune befell a community, a natural inclination existed to seek an explanation, and sometimes that explanation pointed to those who wielded inexplicable power. This fear of the unknown, of the forces that lay beyond human comprehension, began to cast a shadow, hinting at the potential for malevolent magic, animistic beliefs, the understanding that spirits inhabit all aspects of nature, rocks, Rivers, trees, animals provided a fertile ground for both reverence and dread. If spirits could be benevolent, offering protection and bounty, they could also be capricious, even hostile, if offended or manipulated. Those who claim to understand and interact with these spirits, the early sorcerers and medicine men, were therefore seen as wielding a double-edged sword. Their power could be a shield, but it could also be a weapon, capable of inflicting harm as easily as it could bring good. The notion of a pact with unseen forces, a deliberate alliance with entities that operated outside the established order, also predates the rigid doctrines of later religions. While not necessarily a pact with a singular, identifiable devil, the idea of drawing power from sources beyond the human realm, of making bargains or entering into agreements with spiritual entities for personal gain or influence, was a concept that permeated many ancient belief systems. Similarly, the inherent potential for harm, a natural inclination towards causing misfortune or wielding destructive magic, was a characteristic sometimes attributed to individuals who possessed a certain kind of innate power, a darker talent that could not be easily controlled or understood. These early conceptualizations laid the groundwork, the deep, ancient roots, for the complex and often terrifying figure of the witch that would later emerge in the historical consciousness of the Western world. From the earliest whispers of folklore, the idea that one could be born a witch rather than becoming one through a pact or training held a powerful, often unsettling sway over the collective imagination. This wasn't merely a matter of circumstance, but of an inherent, almost cosmic designation. The very fabric of existence, it seemed, could mark an individual from their first breath, setting them apart, aligning them with unseen forces. One of the most persistent and widespread beliefs centered on the caul, a membrane that sometimes covers the head or face of a newborn. This veil, often described as a piece of the amniotic sac still clinging to the infant, was widely considered a potent omen. In many European traditions, particularly in Britain and Ireland, being born with a caul was a direct sign of being a witch, or at the very least, possessing a natural affinity for the supernatural. It was believed that this membrane contained the very essence of the child's destiny, a physical manifestation of their connection to the other world, shielding them from ordinary fate and opening them to extraordinary ones. The caul itself was often preserved, sometimes dried and kept as a talisman, or even sold, for it was said to protect sailors from drowning or grant its owner foresight. To be born under such a sign was not a blessing in the conventional sense. It was an indelible mark, a prophecy whispered at birth. Another potent indicator of an innate predisposition to witchcraft was the lineage of the seventh child. The belief in the magical significance of the seventh child, particularly a seventh child who was also a son, and then his seventh child being a son, was deeply ingrained in many cultures. This unbroken chain of seventh sons was thought to possess extraordinary abilities, often associated with healing, prophecy, or, conversely, with the darker arts. The seventh child of a seventh child, especially a male, was often seen as a conduit for immense power, a natural-born sorcerer whose very existence was a disruption of natural order. This wasn't necessarily a negative attribution. It suggested a unique connection to the world's hidden energies, a power that could be harnessed for good or ill, depending on the individual and the circumstances of their birth. Beyond these specific omens, unusual physical traits or behaviors exhibited from birth could also be interpreted as signs of an innate witch. A child born with teeth already erupted, or with an unusually large or misshapen birthmark, or even one who demonstrated precocious intelligence or a peculiar, unsettling gaze might be viewed with suspicion. These deviations from the norm, these physical or behavioral anomalies, were seen not as random occurrences, but as deliberate markings, coded messages from the unseen world. They suggested a soul that had already been touched by forces beyond human comprehension, a spirit that had perhaps made an unconscious bargain even before it could speak. This concept of inherited predisposition, the idea that witchcraft could run in families, was intrinsically linked to these birth omens. It wasn't solely about the individual, but about their ancestry. A mother or grandmother known for her unusual knowledge or perceived powers could cast a long shadow over her descendants. If a family had a history of misfortune, or if unsettling events seemed to follow them, it was often attributed to a curse, a lingering darkness passed down through generations. And within such families, the birth of a child with any of these marked characteristics, the call, the seventh child lineage, the odd birthmark, served as confirmation, a living testament to the inherited burden or gift of witchcraft. It painted a picture of destiny being woven long before conscious choice, a hereditary tie to the mystical, a birthright of the uncanny. The witch was not always a creature of the shadowed forest, a hag brewing potions in isolation. For much of history, especially in the crucible of early modern Europe, the witch was a neighbor. She was the woman down the lane, the familiar face at the market, a member of your own community. And it was this proximity, this unsettling proximity, that fueled a profound and pervasive fear. This living threat was rooted in the belief that ill will, envy, or a perceived slight could manifest as tangible, devastating harm. A witch, once identified, was not merely an outsider. She was an insider, weaponized. Her malice, fueled by personal grievances or an inherent wickedness, was thought to be capable of inflicting a wide array of misfortunes upon her unsuspecting victims. Central to this fear was the concept of the curse. A witch's words, uttered with intent and perhaps accompanied by specific gestures or incantations, were believed to carry potent magical force. These spoken curses could bring about ruin, from blighted crops and spoiled milk to persistent illness and even death. It wasn't just about wishing someone ill. It was about actively directing malevolent energy towards them, a spiritual and psychological attack that could have devastating consequences. Closely intertwined with the curse was the insidious power of the evil eye. This was the belief that a witch's envious gaze, her covetous glance, could directly cause harm. A witch might admire a child's health, a neighbor's bounty, or a good harvest, and in that moment of envious admiration, unknowingly or deliberately transmit misfortune. This fear was so deeply ingrained that many cultures developed elaborate practices to protect themselves and their loved ones from its effects. The manifestations of a witch's power were varied and often terrifyingly mundane. Illness was a prime target. A persistent fever, a wasting sickness, or the sudden death of livestock were frequently attributed to witchcraft. The witch, through her knowledge of herbs and perhaps a darker understanding of the body's vulnerabilities, was thought to be able to poison, sicken, or drain the life force from her victims. Misfortune, too, fell under her purview. A broken engagement, a failed business venture, or a series of accidents could all be the work of a witch seeking retribution or simply reveling in chaos. The community, keenly aware of this ever-present danger, developed a sophisticated arsenal of defenses. These were not just superstitions. They were deeply embedded practices designed to shield individuals and households from the witch's malevolent influence. Charms and amulets were ubiquitous. Small objects imbued with protective properties were worn, hung above doorways, or placed in clothing. These could range from simple knots of thread, believed to ensnare evil, to more complex items like horseshoe nails, rosemary sprigs, or even specific minerals like amber or jet, all thought to possess apotropaic qualities, qualities that turn away evil. Wards were also a crucial element of community defense. These were symbolic barriers, often created through specific rituals or the placement of certain objects designed to prevent the witch from crossing a threshold or entering a sacred space. A line of salt across a doorway, believed to be an insurmountable barrier for witches, or the placement of iron objects, which were thought to repel them, were common practices. The belief in the power of iron to ward off evil, a theme that echoes through many mythologies, was particularly strong in this context. Furthermore, specific rituals were performed to counteract the witch's influence. These could involve prayers, incantations of one's own, or symbolic actions designed to break a curse or nullify the evil eye. The act of spitting 3 times, for instance, was a common way to deflect ill fortune. The use of specific herbs like garlic or rue in protective rituals was also widespread. These practices, passed down through generations, formed a vital bulwark against the perceived supernatural threats that lurked in the everyday. The witch, therefore, was not just a figure of terror. She was a tangible, living threat to the fabric of community life, and the community's response was equally tangible, woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. The very fabric of existence in many ancient traditions was understood to be woven with the threads of life and death, and what happened at the moment of transition held profound significance. We've explored how the circumstances of one's passing could shape their spiritual destiny, and now we delve deeper into a particularly potent and unsettling facet of this belief, the concept of the bad death and its transformative power. A death that was violent, unnatural, or deeply unjust was rarely seen as a simple cessation of being. Instead, it was believed to leave behind a potent, unquiet spirit, a soul irrevocably altered by the trauma of its departure. These were not the peaceful transitions of the aged or the blessed. These were the abrupt endings, the violent severing of a life that left a psychic wound upon the world. Consider the tragic figure of the suicide. In many cultures, the act of taking one's own life was not merely a personal tragedy, but a violation of cosmic order. The spirit, having defied the natural course of life and death, was often seen as trapped between worlds, unable to find rest. This unresolved energy, this desperate final act, could fester, transforming the departed soul into a vengeful entity, forever seeking recompense or simply lashing out at the living who remained in the world they had forsaken. Their lingering presence was thought to be a manifestation of their own despair, amplified and projected outwards, a spectral echo of their final moments. Equally, those who died under the shadow of a curse were believed to carry that malediction with them into the afterlife. The curse, a potent infusion of ill will and intended harm, could warp the spirit's essence, twisting its inherent nature. Imagine a soul already burdened by such a dark enchantment, its final breaths taken in agony or fear. This potent combination of imposed malevolence and a violent end could ignite a powerful, destructive force, a spirit driven by the very forces that had destroyed it, now turned outwards upon the world. Perhaps the most poignant and pervasive examples come from those unjustly accused and executed. The witch trials, a grim chapter in human history, are replete with stories of individuals condemned on flimsy evidence, their lives extinguished by the fear and prejudice of their communities. When an innocent person was put to death, especially under the guise of purging evil, a profound injustice was committed. The lingering spirit, stripped of its life and its good name, was believed to be imbued with the searing anger of betrayal and the agonizing pain of wrongful accusation. This raw, unaddressed fury became the fuel for their spectral existence. Such a spirit, denied peace and consumed by righteous indignation, would not simply fade away. Instead, it could manifest as a malevolent force, a spectral witch, or a malevolent spirit, forever seeking to punish those who had wronged it, or perhaps even those who simply represented the society that had condemned it. This entity, born from the ashes of injustice, could manifest in various forms: a chilling wind, a disembodied whisper, or even a more tangible embodied presence capable of inflicting harm. Their power stemmed not from innate magical ability in the traditional sense, but from the sheer, unyielding force of their unfulfilled life and their agonizing, unjust end. The very air around them was thought to crackle with the intensity of their grievance, a constant reminder of the wrongs they had suffered. This transformation, from human to spectral tormentor, was a grim testament to the power of trauma and injustice to shape the very essence of the soul. The image of the witch, once a solitary figure lurking at the edges of society, now solidified into a far more terrifying entity. No longer merely a practitioner of strange arts, the witch had become a tangible, often spectral threat capable of inflicting unimaginable harm. This transformation was not born solely from ancient fears, but deeply rooted in the very real anxieties and documented events of history, particularly the widespread panics that swept through communities, fueling the infamous witch trials. These trials, which scarred the landscape of early modern Europe and colonial America, were not abstract persecutions. They were moments where belief and fear coalesced into devastating realities, shaping the very definition of what a witch could be and what they could do. The accusations, the testimonies, the confessions, all painted a chilling portrait of a malevolent force, often manifesting in ways that defied rational explanation, yet were accepted as undeniable truth by those caught in the maelstrom. Perhaps the most starkly illuminated and profoundly tragic example of this era is the Salem witch trials, which convulsed the small Puritan settlement of Salem, Massachusetts, between 1692 and 1693. This period, still studied for its intricate social dynamics and legal failings, offers a granular look at how collective hysteria could weaponize folklore and superstition. It began with the strange afflictions of a group of young women who were soon to be known as the afflicted girls. Their fits, their screams, their contortions, these were interpreted not as physical ailments, but as the direct result of supernatural torment. Central to the proceedings was the concept of spectral evidence. The afflicted girls would claim to see the spirits or specters of the accused individuals tormenting them, often in the form of animals or shadowy figures. These visions, though intangible and unprovable in any conventional sense, were admitted as crucial testimony by the magistrates. Imagine the scene: a courtroom, the air thick with fear and accusation, where the unseen actions of a spectral form were deemed as valid as a physical assault. It was a logic that, once accepted, became a self-fulfilling prophecy, trapping the accused in a web of perceived guilt. Under immense pressure, often through physical coercion or the sheer terror of the proceedings, many individuals confessed to witchcraft. These confessions, frequently detailed with fantastical accounts of pacts with the devil, Sabbaths, and the malevolent use of their powers, served to further validate the ongoing accusations and solidify the terrifying reality of the witch's capabilities in the minds of the populace. The confessions painted a picture of a fully realized, often demonic, witch, actively working against God and community. The consequences were dire. 19 individuals were hanged, their bodies left to hang as stark warnings. Several others died in prison, and many more were imprisoned for extended periods. Families were torn apart, reputations destroyed, and the fabric of the community irrevocably damaged. The Salem witch trials, with their reliance on spectral evidence and coerced confessions, created a palpable, terrifying reality for the inhabitants. The witch was no longer a whisper in the woods. She was a presence in their midst, a tangible threat that could lead to the gallows, leaving an indelible scar on the history of belief and justice. This period serves as a chilling testament to the power of fear, the fragility of reason, and the devastating consequences when folklore and societal anxieties collide with the machinery of law. The accusation, once uttered, was a death knell. But how did a community, gripped by fear and suspicion, translate that whisper into action? The hunt for the witch was rarely a spontaneous mob. It was often a chillingly methodical process steeped in ritual and ancient beliefs. The first step was identification, and here preternatural signs were paramount. Communities scoured bodies for witch marks, physical blemishes like moles, warts, or scars believed to be the devil's brand, a physical manifestation of their unholy pact. These marks were deemed insensitive to pain, and often a pricker, a sharp, slender instrument, would be used to test their veracity, the absence of blood or pain a damning confirmation. Beyond physical marks, the very essence of a suspected witch was put to the test. The infamous swimming a witch ritual, particularly prevalent in some regions, hinged on a deeply ingrained belief that water, a symbol of purity, would reject the unholy. The accused, bound hand and foot, was cast into a body of water. If they floated, it was proof of their guilt, their unnatural buoyancy a testament to demonic influence. If they sank and drowned, their innocence might be recognized, but often it was too late. This trial by water was a brutal gamble where survival itself was the ultimate condemnation. Other methods sought to exploit perceived weaknesses of the supernatural. Iron, long associated with purity and protection against evil spirits, was sometimes used. A suspected witch might be forced to touch a hot iron. If they suffered no burn, it was seen as evidence of demonic protection. Salt, another purifier, was sometimes sprinkled around a suspect's home or person, its presence believed to ward off or reveal demonic intrusions. These were not arbitrary acts. They were deeply symbolic gestures, attempts to codify and control the intangible forces that were believed to govern their world. Once identified and condemned through these increasingly elaborate tests, the final act was destruction, a public spectacle designed to both punish the offender and deter others. The methods of execution varied, but burning at the stake and hanging were the most common. Burning was particularly favored, as the fire was seen as a cleansing force capable of consuming the evil and preventing its earthly taint. The pyre was built, the accused bound, and the flames consumed them, a terrifying testament to the community's righteous fury. Hanging, though perhaps less visually dramatic, was equally final, severing the connection between the body and the soul, a grim finality. Even in death, the fear of the witch's return persisted. Post-mortem rituals were enacted to ensure their spectral presence would not linger to plague the living. The heart of the executed was sometimes burned, its ashes scattered to the winds, a symbolic dispersal of their unholy power. In some traditions, a stake was driven through the heart of a buried witch to further anchor them to the earth and prevent their resurrection. These were not acts of mercy, but rather desperate measures, the final, frantic attempts of a community to reclaim a world they believed had been invaded and corrupted by something utterly alien and malevolent. The witch hunt was a profound societal trauma, a complex interplay of fear, faith, and the desperate human need to impose order on perceived chaos. For centuries, the figure of the witch loomed large in the collective consciousness, a tangible manifestation of fear and the unknown. But as the dawn of reason broke upon the medieval world, and later the Enlightenment sought to illuminate the shadows of superstition, scholars and thinkers began to cast a more critical eye upon these deeply ingrained beliefs. They sought not to dismiss the experiences of those accused, but to understand the roots of these pervasive notions. Delving into the realms of science, sociology, and psychology, one avenue of exploration points to tangible biological causes for the perceived supernatural. Consider the humble rye grain, a staple of the medieval diet. In certain damp, cool conditions, rye can become infected with a fungus known as claviceps purpurea or ergot. This insidious mold produces potent alkaloids, chemically similar to LSD, which, when ingested, can induce terrifying hallucinations, visions, and altered states of consciousness. Imagine a village plagued by ergot-tainted bread. Suddenly, individuals might report seeing spectral figures, experiencing vivid delusions of flying or consorting with demonic entities, all symptoms eerily aligned with accusations of witchcraft. The physical symptoms of ergot poisoning, convulsions, tingling extremities, and gangrene could easily be misinterpreted as the mark of a witch's curse or demonic possession. Beyond individual afflictions, the potent force of mass hysteria also played a significant role. In times of societal upheaval, famine, plague, or war, anxieties run high. Shared fears, amplified by rumor and suggestion, can create a powerful collective delusion. Once the idea of witches took hold, fear itself became contagious. A single accusation, fueled by panic, could ignite a wildfire of suspicion, leading to a cascade of further accusations, often driven by a desperate need to find a scapegoat for misfortunes beyond comprehension. The psychological pressure to conform, to identify the perceived enemy, could be immense, leading seemingly rational individuals to participate in or endorse persecution. Sociological anxieties provided fertile ground for the witch hunts. Societies undergoing rapid change, grappling with economic instability or shifts in power structures, often sought to reassert control by identifying and eliminating perceived threats. Those who deviated from social norms, the elderly, the solitary, the economically marginalized, or those with unconventional healing practices, were often vulnerable. Women, in particular, due to their often subordinate social status and association with domesticity and healing, became frequent targets during periods when patriarchal structures felt threatened. Accusations of witchcraft served as a convenient mechanism for reinforcing social order, silencing dissent, and consolidating power. Furthermore, the misinterpretation of mental illness and physical ailments offers a compelling, albeit tragic, explanation. Conditions we now understand as epilepsy, Tourette's syndrome, or various forms of psychosis with their involuntary movements, vocalizations, or hallucinatory experiences would have been utterly alien and terrifying to medieval and early modern observers. These individuals, suffering from debilitating conditions, could easily have been perceived as being under the influence of dark forces, their distress interpreted as demonic torment or the outward manifestation of an inward pact with evil. The political dimension of witch trials cannot be overstated. In many instances, accusations of witchcraft were weaponized for political gain, accusing rivals, silencing dissenters, or confiscating property could all be facilitated by the convenient label of witch. The legal frameworks of the time, often lacking due process and relying heavily on forced confessions, were ripe for exploitation. The fear of witchcraft, once instilled, created an environment where accusations, however baseless, were readily believed and where the accused often already ostracized, had little recourse. Ultimately, the historical narrative of the witch is not simply a tale of superstition, but a complex tapestry woven from biological vulnerabilities, psychological phenomena, societal anxieties, and the ever-present currents of political power and social control. The echoes of the witch trials, though centuries old, resonate powerfully in our collective consciousness. The archetype, so deeply embedded in our folklore, has proven remarkably resilient, transforming and adapting through time, much like the very figures it purports to represent. Its legacy is not one of static fear, but of a dynamic evolution, a mirror reflecting humanity's shifting anxieties and aspirations. From the cackling, wart-nosed villain of early fairy tales, a creature embodying primal fears of the unknown and the predatory feminine, the witch has undergone a remarkable metamorphosis. In the realm of popular culture, we see this shift vividly. The hag, a convenient scapegoat for societal ills, gradually gave way to more complex and often sympathetic portrayals. Think of the misunderstood enchantress, the wise woman living on the fringes, her knowledge both feared and sought after. This evolution continued, leading us to the modern interpretation, the empowered witch, a figure often associated with self-discovery, healing, and a connection to nature, reclaiming a narrative that was once used to oppress. This contemporary iteration often celebrates the very traits that were once condemned: independence, intuition, and a rejection of rigid societal norms. The physical remnants of this historical persecution also draw a curious, often somber, fascination. Places touched by the hysteria of the witch trials, from the stones of Salem to the gallows sites scattered across Europe, have become sites of pilgrimage and tourism. Visitors, drawn by the morbid allure of history, seek to connect with the past, to understand the forces that led to such widespread fear and injustice. These landscapes, imbued with the weight of tragedy, serve as tangible reminders of a time when belief could lead to brutal persecution and when the label of witch was a death sentence. Indeed, the concept of the witch continues to serve as a potent symbol. It represents the embodiment of societal fears, the fear of the outsider, the fear of uncontrollable forces, the fear of aspects of ourselves that we deem dangerous or unacceptable. The struggle against the perceived evil of the witch is, in many ways, a struggle to impose order upon a chaotic world, to define boundaries, and to maintain a sense of control when faced with the inexplicable. The witch, in her many guises, becomes a convenient antagonist, allowing us to project our anxieties onto a singular, identifiable enemy. Ultimately, what does this enduring myth of the witch truly represent? It speaks volumes about humanity's complex and often contradictory relationship with the unknown. It highlights our innate fear of that which we cannot comprehend, our desperate need to categorize and explain the inexplicable, and our persistent desire for order in a universe that often feels inherently chaotic. The witch, in her multifaceted nature, is not merely a relic of the past. She is a living, breathing testament to our ongoing quest to understand ourselves, our fears, and our place in the grand, often mysterious tapestry of existence. She is the shadow that allows us to appreciate the light, the perceived darkness that helps us define our own boundaries of what is considered good and evil, and a constant reminder of the power of narrative to shape our understanding of the world.